On July 7, 1944, Second Lieutenant John Homan watched his friends vanish from the sky. But surviving the dogfight was only the beginning. He had to fly home on 3 engines, forced to hold formation just 50 yards from a plane that was literally covered in blood. This was only his second mission, and when he landed, they told him he was going back up tomorrow. This is the story of the impossible horrors of the air war, but it began hours earlier. The chill on that morning felt less like air and more like a river, a slow, damp current that flowed through the thick fleece of a flight jacket and pooled deep in the bones. For Homan, sitting in the co-pilot seat of the consolidated B-24 Liberator, the cold was inseparable from the tension coiling in his gut. He felt the aircraft come alive through the soles of his boots, a low shudder that grew into a deep, bone-rattling vibration as the 4 Pratt & Whitney engines coughed to life. One by one, they caught, sputtered black smoke, and then roared into a deafening chorus. That roar was the anthem of their existence, a sound that meant 29 tons of aluminum, high-octane fuel, bombs, and 10 men were about to claw their way off the ground. This was only his second combat mission, just the second. Their bomber, christened Joe, was a single cog in the vast machinery of the 8th Air Force. Today, that machine was set in motion with unprecedented force. Over 1,000 heavy bombers were rising from muddy fields all across East Anglia, aimed like a colossal shotgun at strategic targets deep inside the Reich. Their target was the Junkers aircraft plant at Aschersleben. It was a vital organ, the birthplace of the infamous Ju-88s. To destroy it was to perform surgery on the enemy's heart with a sledgehammer. The takeoff was a matter of brutal physics. Joe lumbered down the runway, refusing the air until the last possible second before lifting heavily into the pale sky. As they climbed through the low clouds, the sky became a thundering river of steel flowing east. John looked out at the massive 110-foot wing to his right. They flew in a tight combat box, a defensive formation designed so the overlapping fields of fire from their 1050s would create a wall of lead. The flight over the North Sea was a strange limbo. Then they crossed the coast of Holland, and the very air seemed to grow heavier. This was enemy territory. John's mind flashed back to the briefing just hours before. The intelligence officer's voice had been flat, reading a death sentence like a grocery list. Luftwaffe intelligence indicates they'll throw everything they have at you. The yellow-nosed bastards of JG-1 are based here. Be ready for head-on attacks. They'll come straight at you, 20 or 30 abreast, trying to break up the formation with 20mm cannons. Now, 4 miles high, those words felt chillingly real. The first signs of trouble appeared. Ahead, innocent-looking puffs of black smoke against the brilliant blue. Flak. As they flew closer, the decorative puffs revealed their deadly nature. Each black cloud was a sphere of space saturated with jagged, red-hot shards of steel from an exploding 88mm shell. "Bombardier, you have the airplane," the skipper said over the intercom, his voice tight. The bombardier took control. From that moment, the pilots became merely a stable platform. They had to hold the bomber perfectly steady, making them a predictable, vulnerable target. A soulless mechanical whine filled the aircraft as the bomb bay doors rolled open. A slight lurch signaled that the bombs were away. The 12 seconds of absolute vulnerability were over. The skipper began banking the big Liberator into a wide turn to head back west. And in that instant, the sky exploded. "Bandits! 1 o'clock high!" John's head snapped to the right. Where there had been empty blue, there was now a swarm of angry black dots. They weren't maneuvering. They were lining up, diving straight at them, head-on. It was the suicidal tactic the briefing had warned about. Dozens of yellow-nosed Messerschmitt 109s were screaming toward the bomber formation at a closing speed of 600 miles per hour. "Open fire! All positions, open fire!" The command was swallowed by a new, terrible sound. It wasn't the boom of flak, but the dry, ripping mechanical sound of high-speed 20mm cannons. White flashes stitched across the sky as the German fighters raked the formation. The first Messerschmitt flashed past their cockpit so close John saw the pilot's face. Joe shuddered as impacts hammered the fuselage like a giant fist. A spiderweb of cracks bloomed across the armored glass. To their right, Lieutenant Frank Folk's B-24 convulsed. A German fighter stitched a line of cannon fire across its nose and top turret. The explosive shells didn't just punch holes. They tore away fist-sized chunks of aluminum. The top turret, a moment before a lethal weapon, was now a smoking wreck. Time slowed to a crawl. And then, a new voice cut through the noise. "Little friends, 9 o'clock, coming down!" P-51 Mustangs dove into the fray from above. Their 650s tore into the German formations. The sky instantly degenerated into a swirling dogfight. The disciplined German attack fell apart, and the fighters vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The fight had lasted 8 minutes. The silence that followed was a deafening void, filled only by the wind rushing through dozens of new holes in the fuselage. John forced himself to initiate the crew check-in. One by one, the voices came back, hoarse, strained, but alive. Then came the awareness of the cost. John looked to his left, where the low squadron of their group had been flying. The sky was empty. Where 11 Liberators had been just minutes ago, there was nothing but fading smoke trails. 11 crews, over 100 men, simply erased. "Everyone, form up on me," the skipper's voice cracked over the radio. "We're going home." Home was 450 miles away. Flying just off their right wing was the battered Liberator of Lieutenant Frank Folks. His ship was a wreck, the nose section riddled with holes. Yet Folks held his position, a bleeding ghost keeping pace. Suddenly, Joe gave a violent shudder. The roar of the engines changed pitch. "Losing number 3, the skipper yelled. The inboard engine on the right wing gave a grinding shriek and belched black smoke. The loss created a tremendous asymmetric drag, trying to tear the plane from the sky. The nose yawed violently to the right. "Feather the prop!" John flipped the switch. The blades of the dead propeller turned into the wind, reducing drag. But now flying became a grueling physical battle. John and the skipper had to maintain constant, heavy pressure on the left rudder pedal to keep the wings level. It was during this struggle that John's gaze drifted up to Folks's plane again, and what he saw would be burned into his memory forever. The plexiglass dome of the neighbor's top turret was shattered. The gunner was still in his seat, but a direct hit from a 20mm shell had taken his head clean off. The body was slumped lifelessly. The 200-mile-per-hour slipstream had siphoned the blood from the severed neck and sprayed it across the top of the fuselage in ghastly, brilliant red streaks that ran all the way to the tail. It wasn't just death. It was a surreal desecration, a flying tombstone painted in blood. "Oh my God," John whispered. He forced his eyes away, fixing them on the instruments. Oil pressure, airspeed. He had to erase that image. He retreated into the cold logic of numbers. If he dwelled on the horror, he would lose focus, and a single mistake now would kill them all. They limped westward. The Dutch landscape passed below, serene and indifferent. The uneven 3-engine drone became the soundtrack to their survival. Finally, the gray line of the North Sea appeared, followed, after an eternity, by the white cliffs of Dover. But the ordeal wasn't over. Bringing in a crippled 3-engine Liberator was a razor's edge gamble. "Gear down," the skipper commanded, as the runway rushed up to meet them. The landing gear dropped with a grinding protest. On the panel, the light for the right main gear flickered uncertainly between green and red. They had no idea if it would hold. The touchdown was brutal. The plane slammed into the concrete. The problematic right gear screamed, threatening to collapse, but miraculously held. The skipper wrestled with the brakes, the smell of burning rubber filling the cockpit. Finally, the mangled bomber rolled to a stop. John felt his body go limp. The muscles that had been rigid as steel turned to jelly. They staggered out to the hardstand, met by the silent horror of the ground crew. Joe was a sieve. John walked around the plane, peering into a waste window where the floor was a carpet of brass casings. Then came the intelligence debriefing. The questions were cold and clinical. Describe the attack. How many parachutes did you count? The heaviest presence in the room was the empty chairs where the crews of the lost Low Squadron should have been sitting. Their coffee mugs from breakfast were still on the tables. Finally dismissed, the crew walked in silence back to their Nissen hut. All John wanted was to sleep until this day was a bad dream. He tossed his gear onto his cot. You've got to be kidding me. One of the gunners was standing by the bulletin board. Everyone turned. Pinned there was the flight roster for tomorrow, July 8th. Next to the designation of a replacement aircraft were their names: Homan, Puska, and all the rest. A collective groan filled the hut. They had just walked out of hell, seen their friends incinerated, and the machine of war was demanding they do it all again in a few hours. John said nothing. He collapsed onto his cot, too numb to be afraid. He closed his eyes, but the image of the blood-streaked plane flashed in the darkness. He squeezed them shut tighter. To survive, you had to forget. The mission of July 7, 1944, was recorded as a success. The factories at Aschersleben were heavily damaged, but the price was staggering. The 2nd Air Division alone lost 28 liberators that day. For John F. Homan, it was just the beginning. He would complete his tour, but he knew that a part of him would remain forever in the cold skies over Germany, a witness to the ghost ships and the impossible horrors of the air war.